Let's continue. Wop, wop. I recorded 3 hours yesterday. Well, you're gonna see them all spread out. Hello? Oh. The next day was clear. However, the atmosphere felt heavy and foreboding, like the calm before a storm. Konoe groomed, fixed his outfit, ate and drank a little, and finally headed for the depths of the forest. As they proceeded north, his endlessly green field of view suddenly cleared. He squinted at the unexpected brightness. There was a fantastic spectacle before him. A field of 4 colors. Okay. The small grassy area was teeming with light. Red, yellow, blue, and green transparent light overlapped, forming a near indescribable color. Each light was cast from a surrounding stone in the grass. The smooth surfaces reflected the moonlight like mirrors. It was just like what he had heard in the stories.
不思議な場所だな.
Asato muttered. He was captivated. This was a scene that could be called beautiful, but Konoe felt it was a bit ominous. Since he treaded into the space deep inside his body, something was reacting. Was it his stomach? He felt sick, like his blood was boiling. Something was off about this place. He felt pressure, as if he was being wrapped in an invisible shroud.
4色の光に満ちた地。開くべき扉はそこにあるか。
These were Leek's words. Rai, lost in thought, stared at his feet in silence and cautiously swayed his tail until he finally turned and nodded to Konoe.
そこに立ってみろ。
He pointed to the grass where the 4 colors of light intersected. Not knowing what else to do, Konoe set foot in the grass. When he stood where all the lights shone together, it almost seemed like overflowing water as if it shimmered remarkably. The colors seemed to form a thin film over the outside world, distorting his view. It was a very mysterious place. He stood still for a while, but nothing seemed to happen.
何かする必要があるんじゃないか?
Sure, just get on your knees and pray.
何をだ? わからない。儀式とか。
When Konoe hesitated, Rai sighed.
騙されたか。この岩、珍しいな。こんな岩、見たことない。
Obviously, they're beautiful old CGI. Asato approached one of the 4 stones and tilted his head as if he'd noticed something.
これは、紋章?
The ones on here? Yeah, sure. There was something like a sigil carved into the stone. They were weathered, but since they were so large, Konoe could see even from where he stood. All 4 stones seemed to have a carved crest.
待て。
Rai suddenly narrowed his eye sharply.
この形。
Konoe looked closely as well. Suddenly, Konoe's heart throbbed. His eyes were glued to the carved sigil. The tip of his tail quivered. His mind knew something was different. It was just a carved crest. But Rai looked at Konoe with a stern expression. Asato turned, startled as well.
これも、こっちも。全部、この絵のあざと同じじゃないか。
But his words did not reach Konoe. Konoe's eyes were fixed to the carved sigils for an entirely different reason.
蛇
The seals seemed like invisible snakes. It was his imagination. Crests could have all kinds of forms, but it was pointless to think this way. Those were serpents. He brought his quivering fingertips to his lips. Those serpents had entered his mouth, glided down his throat, gnawed away at his insides. Their slippery scales and fleshy sensation were vividly revived. They trailingly pulled to and fro at his insides. Nausea suddenly rose and Konoe sank to his knees while covering his mouth with his hand. The serpents were rampaging throughout his stomach, the 4 snakes he had swallowed that night.
コノエどうした
Someone's hand was grasping his shoulder. He couldn't recognize who it was. His shrouded view could only see the green grass and the light. Anything past that was a blur. Konoe heaved for breath and saliva began dripping. His stomach and throat were burning. Unable to bear it any longer, Konoe vomited. There was a high-pitched ringing in his ears. He didn't understand why. It was painful. His heart pounded at a frightening speed. His thoughts dimming, Konoe heard a voice speaking in his mind.
覚えているかこの感触
He heard a voice from the depths of his body. Getting up in a panic, Konoe was terrified. He couldn't see anything. As if he were in a dense fog, he could not even discern colors. Occasionally, he heard what might have been Rai and Asato's voices, but they immediately faded. What he did know was that the snakes were raging in his body. His stomach felt hot. He felt like his body was squeezed as thin as his tail and groaned out. The pain tormented his defenseless body directly. His instincts cried out in alarm. Maintain consciousness. He fumbled for his tail and held tight. Trying not to lose consciousness, Konoe dug his claws into his tail. Konoe bared his teeth in pain, but even the feeling of his claws digging into his weakest part gradually became distant. He clung to his lost shred of consciousness. Don't let go. If he let go, he'd... Konoe awoke to a cold sensation on his cheek. He opened his eyes. What he thought was cold was just the wind blowing. Where was he? When he tried to get up, Konoe grimaced at the sharp pain in his stomach. The uncomfortable feeling of the violent snakes was still fresh in his mind. Holding his belly through his clothes and using one arm to prop himself up, Konoe slowly lifted. He just shifted his bottom and sat back down. Where were Rai and Asato? When Konoe looked around, he saw his view was clouded with darkness. He blinked several times to try and clear his eyes, but this was different. The 4 stones and grass were gone, and he didn't know what lay beyond the fog either. When he looked to his hand, there was no floor. No. His hand was surely touching something. The floor was invisible. No matter how hard he looked, Konoe saw nothing. He heard the thumping of his heart awfully clearly. With all his nerves on edge, Konoe looked at his surroundings with bated breath. Bated. He didn't know where he was or what was happening. When he began to gulp down saliva, he realized his throat was parched. Only the tip of his tail shook slightly to indicate his tension. Konoe's ears twitched at the sudden noise. It was heavy, wet sound as if in a womb. How did he know what a womb sounds like? The tension rising in him, his claws instinctively scratched at the ground. Though the floor seemed stiff, his nails sank in slightly with a strange sensation. And then he could hear music. Both near and far, a melody sounded like an illusion. Then Konoe suddenly realized it was the same as the dream. If so, what came afterwards would be... As if reading his thoughts, an impending green light burst open. He was blinded, his view cut off painfully by the light. The snake would come next. It made a slithering sound and coiled around him before disappearing from his sight. Konoe stood. Only that feeling he hated. Agitation coursed down his spine, the fur on his tail swelled. When Konoe opened his eyes and tried to endure the dazzling glare, the light struck again. This time it was the yellow light. The blue after that. Then red light struck and exploded. No matter how much he squeezed his eyes shut, the exceedingly bright light could be seen through his eyelids. He didn't suffer physically, but Konoe grit his teeth in shock, struggling to breathe. Green, yellow, blue, red. The same colors as the snakes in his dreams. The snakes wriggled inside his belly. After the last trial of light passed, it became quiet. He heard and saw nothing. Suspicious, Konoe tried to slowly open his eyes. Pitch black darkness opened up. Even if he tried to look around, it was no different than when his eyes were shut. Konoe sat down in the middle of the deep darkness. What was happening? As if it was the only sound in existence, he heard the beating of his heart. It pulsated right beside his ear. The darkness was heavy. Sweat formed in the palms of his hands. Konoe wanted to escape, but here he didn't know where he could turn. He got down on his knees, huddled over, and held his breath. In the strained silence, something swayed in front of him, restraining his heart that seemed like it would explode. Konoe firmly strained his eyes. He furrowed his brow. A small flame burned in the sky ahead. It was a green flame. Flickering faintly like a snake's tongue, it cast a wavering light in the darkness. Fire wasn't good. Instinctively, he backed away. The sweat blurring on his palms worsened. There was a sound behind him, and his body went stiff. Konoe looked back slowly with a foreboding feeling. Now, a new flame had appeared. This time it was a yellow flame. Then red and blue flames emerged from the darkness to his left and right. The flames that were the same colors as the snakes floated around Konoe as if surrounding him. Konoe muttered, eyes wide open in fright. His body was frozen. He felt like his tense nerves would explode. Forgetting to blink, Konoe hurriedly looked around at the full flames. His wavering tail swelled and trembled with uncertainty. If only he could run. Anywhere was okay. He wanted to escape from this siege somehow. No matter where he turned, flames would be there. Konoe was overwhelmed, unsure where to run to. Suddenly the flames flared up in unison and began to blaze even more intensely. He stopped moving in surprise, then jumped back. The flames crackled as if to intimidate Konoe, their tips swaying. Fire. Fire. Konoe was concerned. At the center of the circle, he helplessly lowered his ears. The hand supporting his body slipped and his shoulder hit the floor. At that moment, Konoe's eyes grasped something within the flame. When they flickered down for just an instant, he saw something tethered there. He grit his teeth desperately and stared, frowning against the heat. Shadows. In each of the 4 flames, he saw a black shadow. Someone was there. A different sound echoed in Konoe's ears, stunning him. Okay. After a few seconds, Konoe finally recognized those voices. Someone's suppressed chuckling accompanied the swaying, vividly colored flames. Instinctively, a threatening sound rumbled from his throat. "They're dangerous," a voice said somewhere in his head. But the depths of his stomach pulsed and Konoe held his breath. He soon grimaced and roughly exhaled. At the same time, the markings on his body grew hot. Although not enough to make him jump, the heat seemed to steadily scorch his skin. I mean... No. The biggest catch. Okay. Various voices rained down from overhead. In the meantime, the serpents continued to violently writhe inside Konoe's body. The marks continued emitting heat, and Konoe suffered the enduring torment, feeling as if he was being tortured to death. It hurt. All his emotions jumbled into one big mass. Without sinking down, without rebelling, they stood still in his stagnant froth. Unable to spit them out, he grit his teeth and contorted his face. What is this? What are you talking about? Hazily opening his eyes, he peeked at them. In his fading vision, the yellow flame flared up particularly strongly, then died down little by little. A black shadow manifested in the wavering flames. Konoe's eyes opened wide at what protruded from the head of the silhouette. They weren't ears. Those were horns. It was a devil.
Yo, 聞いてただろ? 俺はベルグ。快楽を司る精霊神悪魔か? まあ何でもいいけどよ。
Not my type, yeah. The devil descended cautiously from the sky as if he were stepping down invisible stairs, then stood right in front of Konoe. He was much larger than Konoe and had short silver hair. There was no escaping his sharp gaze. When Konoe looked closely, he saw a black, weary tail different from a cat's. He was overwhelmed by the breathtaking sight. Just standing next to Verg made the air oppressive. It wasn't like the shadow he'd fought before. The presence of a person with power incomparable to his own reached his skin. This was a devil? The yellow snake wriggled joyfully in the depths of his stomach.
うんとかすんとか言ったらどうなんだおい。
Hey. Scowling in displeasure, Verg moved his legs, touching the tip of his boot to the chin of the crouching Konoe. Reflexively feeling aversion, Konoe instinctively turned his face away to shake him off. Well, that's very gay of you, sir. While enduring the crushing pain, he glared back and mustered his voice from his parched throat.
なんでどうして俺に
Verg whistled.
なんでだ
お
とそうきたかさすが猫だ気ぐらいが高えやなお前自分の立場分かってんのか
Well, currently I'm on my knees in between a circle of devils, so, well. When Konoe tried to withdraw, Verg leaned his tall figure over and squatted down, grabbing Konoe's shoulder with one hand. He does have heterochromia. I do like that. The foreign fingers felt like they mercilessly dug into him, and he grimaced.
反抗的な目だなムカつくぜだがそういうのは嫌いじゃねえいたぶりがいがあるからな
Ooh! Oh boy. Konoe was forced to peer into the sharp light dwelling in those pupils. He desperately fought the urge to look away. It was overwhelming. It was also different. Verg's glare seemed to halt his breath. As if he could see right into Konoe's mind, Verg smirked. He loaded more force into the fingers digging into Konoe's shoulder, making him grit his teeth.
さあ俺の目を見なやだやだじゃねえよ
Verg pulled Konoe's shoulder closer, and the distance between their faces narrowed. Konoe was going to turn down his eyes, but he couldn't do it in time. Odd light swayed in Verg's eyes. Suddenly, numbness like a strong electric shock ran from his tail up his entire body, and Konoe arched his back and cried out involuntarily. What was that just now? Surprised at how loud his yell was, he was ashamed and covered his mouth with the back of his hand. But the numbness in the rest of his body did not disappear. On the contrary, luscious waves rose from his waist. All his hair stood on end at the intense sensation. His fluffed-out tail shivered in pain.
おうおうかわいそうに耳がぺったんこになってるぜお前普通のやつより感じちまうんだろう大変だよな
Konoe sighed unintentionally at the low, laughing voice touching the soft fur on his ears. The snake raged within his guts, and his markings burned hot. The waves drowned out the pain. His body was hot. He didn't understand this. His lower limbs ached and throbbed. The unknown passion sought an exit and raged in a swirling whirlpool. It made him dizzy. Opening his eyes wide, Konoe salivated from slightly parted lips. He wanted so much that he reacted even to his own restless breathing. What was this? Konoe didn't know what was happening to his own body, confused and frightened. What was happening? What?
いいか選ぶのはお前だ
Ha! Ha ha! He's the dude of lust, but I'm going I'm wishing abstinence.
受け取ったぜ。じゃあな。
Just like in that dream, the words naturally came out as Konoi desperately chose within the chaos of his thoughts. The impulse disappeared from his body as if it had fallen, and Verg vanished in a puff of smoke. All that remained was his discomfort, the snake writhing in his stomach and the heat of his mockings. As his wheezing made his chest heave up and down, Konoi stretched out his stiff limbs. He opened his eyes in a daze. His thoughts were black, and when he tried to think of what happened, nothing arose. Humiliation, anger, fright, and surprise all mixed, and it was more than he could think about. However, he was taken aback at the display reflected in his vision next. The yellow flame disappeared from the dark ceiling, and the green flame flared up next. They were still coming. There was an unpleasant lingering sweetness left, but Konoi wiped his lips and sat up in a low crouch. I do think that this is the moment where we could achieve a bad ending, so I'm gonna be careful here and save at every decision. Just like with Verg, the devil calmly descended.
さて、僕の番だ。ベルグの相手は大変だったろう。性的な衝動なんて疲れるだけだ。そうは思わないかい？
Yeah? This devil wore glossy black attire on his thin body, but he spoke in a cheery voice contrary to his appearance. The upper half of his face was covered by what looked like a mask, but a big smile was clearly formed on his lips. Behind him was a tail just like Verg's, that was probably a devil's tail. This time the green snake writhed around in Konoi's stomach.
はじめまして。僕はフラウド。司るのは気悦だ。もう分かってると思うけど、僕のも選んでもらわなくちゃならない。なんで？どうしてあんたたちが俺を？
Desperately propping his creaking body up, Konoi bristled up as he glared at Froud. It hurt too much, and he felt numb. He no longer knew what hurt and where he felt hot. Froud opened his arms widely and happily tilted his head back.
いいね。そういう姿は素直に可愛いと思うな。小さな毛玉の存在が必死に牙をむき、毛を逆立てている。すごくけなげだ。リークスの命令なのか？リークス？そんな話はどうでもいいじゃないか。今、君の目の前にいるのは僕なんだから。
I mean, you're right. Still laughing, Furaudo lightly bent his upper body and slowly crossed his widespread arms in front of his chest.
僕の喜びを君にも味合わせてあげよう。
His final words were whispered and his smile turned cruel. Furaud's crossed arms opened powerfully and a sharp green wind ran by. Exposed directly to it, Konai turned his face away and protected his head with both arms. His heart beat loudly and he opened his eyes wide. He heard a voice. He tried to shake it from his ears, like a hallucination, but it was different. The voice certainly echoed in his head. Screams, shouts, a voice pleading for help. Cries. Little by little they increased into a steady flow, one big mass. On the backs of his eyelids, in his ears, in the back of his forehead, he heard countless voices screaming. It was a mad cacophony of large and small, male and female, and Konai thought he'd go crazy. But the strange part was his own emotions towards them. He felt exquisite exaltation. Konoe was confused and felt like his body was melting away into the raging voices.
命ある者が最も極みに上り詰める瞬間は何だと思う？意図せず誰かに命を奪われる時さ。その時魂は叫ぶんだ。生きようとして死という未知なるものへの恐怖から逃れようとして、この瞬間こそ命の炎は燃え上がる。それを味わうなんて極上の喜びだとは思わないか？
Not really, no. The moment their lives were taken, then these voices, savage impulses formed from a joyful tickle inside his chest. Konoe's heart leapt again. The impulse coursed through his body along with his blood. With this hand, Konoe wanted to crush everything. Sweet, splattering blood, exposed entrails throbbing with a lovely pulsation. He wanted to discover all those secrets daily life never yielded underneath the skin. He crouched on the floor and exhaled a hot breath. I want to kill. I want to kill. I want to kill.
楽しんでくれているようだね。それじゃ疑似的ではあるけれど、最も美しい時をサービスしよう。
Raud raised one hand and snapped his fingers. Right after it, Konoe heard a hiss of the wind. Suddenly trembling, Konoe's body went stiff. There was a heavy impact on the back of his stomach. It was as if he'd been pierced by a huge blade. Could it be? Konoe looked down to his stomach as he kneeled but saw nothing. Long after the surprise, the pain came. He felt like a sharp object was certainly piercing his guts. The wind passed lightly by Konoe's cheeks, contrary to his own heavy breathing.
さあ、僕のために選んでくれ。
Oh my goodness. Oh no, it froze. The game froze. No, not again. Ah, let's wait a few seconds. If it doesn't work, I guess this is gonna be a short part. Ah, I'm sorry. Good that we saved earlier. Ah, it's working. Okay, never mind. Cool. Cool. We are feeling sin. Not a good thing. No joy.
受け取ったよ。ありがとう。
Through the searing pain, Konoe chose whatever words came to his mind. Everything faded and he was set free. Both Vraud's figure and the feeling of his stomach being pierced incredibly faded away. Lying wearily on the floor, Konoe cast a vacant look to the sky. The green flame vanished. 2 more left. Why did he need to go through this? Exhausted in body and mind, he thought of the name that was the root of all his evil. Riksu. Resentment rose with vivid color into his turbid thoughts. This time the blue flame flared and another devil stepped down. His body cried out, but it was impossible to escape. All I do remember is that he is gorgeous. However, Konoe raised his upper body and glared at the devil. The next devil narrowed his eyes sadly for some reason and watched Konoe for a while. His complexion was pale as death itself, and his figure was wrapped in sullen clothes. He seemed to have an air of rejecting everything.
私はカルツだ。悲哀を司る。辛い思いをさせているな。早く終わらせよ。
He's not as pretty as I remembered him, but he's pretty nonetheless. Oh, never mind. The devil's voice was low and calm, and Karutsu as he'd introduced himself, knelt in front of Konoe. Never mind, the side shot was just not very flattering. He's very gorgeous. When he came close, Konoe already bristled out and growled worry by instinct. But an arm stretched without concern, and a pale hand touched his head. The blue snake bounded inside him.
触るな
Emotions flowed into him, and he immediately tried to stop his movements. This was a sensation he knew well. This was the empathy that he had felt so many times. His heart was flooded with crushing sorrow, and Konoe knit his eyebrows tightly. He felt sad and immediately began to shed tears and cry out.
お前も悲しい運命を背負わされているな。好きでこのようなところにいるわけではないだろう。
なんであんたがそんなことを。
物事は時に思いもよらない方向へ転がっていく。
That's true.
我々もまたしかりだ。こんなやり方は本意ではないが仕方ない。
Karatsu's hands moved down from Konoe's hair to gently caress his cheek. From the places that his hand touched, Konoe's eyes felt hot as if sadness itself had soaked into him, and he wept without really knowing why. Karatsu grimaced apologetically.
すまない。選んでくれ。
He is so nice, okay? He is just so nice. And I fear that if I go with him more often, that I would get a bad ending out of this. But I will go for grief, because grief is nothing bad. And grieving is normal.
確かに受け取った。
When Konoe chose his words, the feelings of sorrow immediately left, and Karatsu also disappeared. He sensed his body was paralyzed, but compared to what had happened with Verg and Fraud, it was over disarmingly quickly. That devil had a mysterious aura. Only one remained. The blue flame disappeared from overhead, leaving the blazing red flame. As the devil finally descended, Konoe mistook the crimson air billowing before him for fire.
ようやくだ。ずいぶん待たされた。
He is also not shabby. This thing screams slut, I don't know. The devil slowly walked forward and knelt down, peering at Konoe's face. Konoe's exhausted body no longer had the strength to stand, but he clenched his teeth forcefully and stared back with determined eyes. The red-haired devil narrowed his eyes as if evaluating him, and then touched Konoe's chin to make him look up. It was hot. The unexpected heat of the hand on his chin made his ears
俺は
twitch.
ラゼル、憤怒を司る。怒りは全ての力の源だ。
He is right. Speaking in a confident tone despite his low timbre, Razel gave a small smile. Both his body and his smile seemed calm, and an immeasurable spirit was conveyed. Inside Konoe's body, the final red snake writhed.
鮮やかな怒りだ。炎のように鮮やかな。生も根も尽き果てて、それでも心は諦めない。
He spoke lightly and let go of Konoe's
お
chin.
前の中の炎を煽ろう。きっと美しく燃えるだろう。
A red flame burned in Razel's outstretched hand. As soon as Konoe saw it, it became impossible to look away. His heart began to throb when he saw its movements like a flickering tongue. It was like an illusion, dyeing his eyes bright red. An impulse of intense anger welled up. It swirled from red to black before his eyes, and he breathed heavily. His pupils became sharp as needles, and his tail bristled out. He wanted to destroy. There was a sound ringing in his ears, enough to split his head open. From that dark excitement, he wanted to burst out laughing.
お前の好きなように選べ。
I'm saying heat and not hellfire. Art, sorry. Because this is not the right way.
わかった。
The final red flame faded away along with Razel. The crackling of the fire died down, and only Konoe's fervent breathing disturbed the eerie silence. There was now nothing overhead. Was it over? He noticed the uncomfortable feeling of the snake slithering in his stomach had gone away, and the heat of his markings had cooled down. Covered in his own tears and spittle, Konoe was in a wretched state. He was ashamed and could no longer speak in his misery, but he felt like he'd scaled a mountain, so he did not care about his appearance anymore. Rolling face up and pushing himself up, Konoe was startled. He peered down and lifted up his gauntlet, furrowing his eyebrows tightly. They had vanished. His markings, the proof that the curse was real, had vanished. As if washed away by rain, the jet black had become clear.
どうして
At the same time that he murmured this, the darkness suddenly burst open. Bathed in pure white light, Konoe closed his eyes to the painful glare. Howling, roaring, both high and low in pitch, the wind blew powerfully. He held his breath and raised his arms to shield his face. The gale was that intense. Suddenly, the wind stopped. Past his closed eyelids, he saw his surroundings brighten. Little by little, Konoe opened his eyes.